Hello everyone, Nick Jacobson here again. This is part 2 of our episode 5, the active shooter fight. I'll be showing you a video that both me and my co-presenter, Shane, used to be able to go and share with our faculty and staff at the school district I used to work for. And we would use this for when either me or him were not present. And it was because during our active threat, active shooter trainings we deliver, we would give a demonstration so that the staff could get an understanding and a visual of what does it mean when we say you need to control the weapon first. So we're going to go over that video. As a note and a reminder, you're not walking away from any of this being a trained fighter. You're also not going to be learning weapons disarms. I want to make that clear. These are not disarms. We're going to be showing you a control tactic to do a disarm of any type of weapon, whether it's a firearm or a knife or a club. To train in weapons disarms takes thousands of repetitions done correctly in order to be able to do that with muscle memory in a high stress situation. And there's typically not enough time for every person to learn that. So if you can, and you do have the ability and means to go out and learn things like Krav Maga or one of the other different martial arts that teach and train weapons disarms, great, please do it. Any martial art will benefit you. But I also want to point out to those who have done martial arts in the past, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, whatever it may be, taekwondo, you're not in a traditional fight. You're dealing with a firearm, and you have to deal with that firearm first. So here's the video that we had created to our staff to help explain what does it really mean to control the weapon.
So, Shane, tell us a little bit about fight and fighting.
Yeah, so traditionally when we think of fight, we think of person versus person, like man versus man, woman versus woman, man versus woman, whatever the situation is. We're thinking person on person. And in an active shooter event, when we're dealing with an armed person, we can no longer look at fight like we traditionally have in that sense. There's certain key concepts that have to be applied, and we have to take a different tactical approach to that type of situation.
Do you think you can give us a little bit of a demonstration of how we would look traditionally at fight?
Yeah, all right, let's do it. All right, so I'm going to put Nick here in what's known as a fighting stance. I'm going to get here. I'm going to have Nick actually throw a punch at me, like we would kind of think when we think about fight. So, and then I'm going to break it down, and you'll kind of start to see why I'm doing this. So we're here. Nick's going to throw a punch. All right, so let's kind of break that down. So what happened is I'm standing here. And traditionally, we think fight person versus person. Nick threw that punch at me. I identified right off the bat that he was being aggressive and he was throwing that strike. I identified this is his weapon, and his target area was right here in my jawline head area. So I don't want to get hit. So what did I do? A lot went into not getting hit. As soon as he threw that, I moved in. I moved the target past the weapon. He has a lot of power being generated, so I threw in a shoulder stop. So I moved in here to try to take away some of that power. But I also had to block that punch. So he throws it. Here, I moved in, shoulder stop, and I blocked it, preferably on the far side of the elbow, because there's just too much play here. So a lot went into not getting hit. From that point, I came up to the crown of the head, I took a step, I pivoted over here to generate distance from my knee to my target, and I pulled him into that first knee. At that point, I went back down, I stepped again, knee, and then I set up proper foot placement to finish with that last elbow. So a lot went in to my defense and my counterattack just not to get hit from that punch. And that's traditionally how we think of a fight.
Now, what happens then once a weapon is introduced into a fight?
Once this weapon is introduced, does any of those traditional fight moves that I was just doing apply at this moment? No, they don't. I have to apply certain key concepts in which you just heard about. I have to make sure that I'm getting out of that line of fire. I'm gaining control of the weapon, not the individual, because the weapon is an extension of that individual and is the primary threat. And with a firearm, that extension extends out very far. And then, that's when I release my attack, which looks more like that traditional fight in that sense.
So as you have learned earlier, when it came to your assessment phase, you're setting yourself up tactically near that main door where the threat is likely to be coming from. This is so you can assess whether or not if the threat's getting closer or further away, whether or not if you have that opportunity to run, or God forbid you're forced in that fight. Now remember, this entire time, your kids or whoever else is with you in your space, they're right there with you, lined up, also assessing the situation, being prepared for whatever comes next. So within the fight portion, Shane, utilizing some of the concepts that you talked about with us just a moment ago, the concepts of like controlling the weapon, how does that apply when it comes to being set up tactically in this position, nearest the door?
All right, well, like Nick stated, we're moving towards that door and our kids are coming with us. They're going to be over there. We don't want anybody spread throughout the room because you're going to easily be able to be placed in the line of fire when you're away from that door. So we need to get over there and make that initial assessment. So when we're there making that assessment, we're thinking, can we move? Or is that fight coming through my door? In my mind, the entire time, I'm 100% ready for that fight to come through my door if it does, because I'm going to need to respond. So I'm there, I'm in the ready, and I'm tactically set up. If that weapon was to come through that door with that gunman, and freeze. Right here, by setting up tactically, for a fraction of a second, I'm not in that line of fire. But I have to be quick. I have to capitalize on the fact that I tactically set up, got out of the line of fire for that short amount of time, and utilized the element of surprise to get the jump on the shooter. We have to remember, they view us all as victims. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in here doing this. They don't go into police stations and expect to go through and shoot all the police officers throughout the building. So I have that element of surprise because they don't believe I'm going to fight back. And I'm going to fight. I'm going to do whatever it takes to survive. But I have to be quick. And there's certain ways that I can tactically gain control of that weapon to increase my chances in that fight. First, I need to grab this weapon, utilizing that element of surprise that I just talked to you about. I'm out of line of fire, now I have to go on and go hands-on and control this weapon. I can't really mess up this grab when dealing with the semi-automatic pistol. I'm either going to come over or under. Never am I going to get back in that line of fire, though, with that muzzle. Under or over. This backhand is going to come up over the top, just like so. So I'm going to be here or here. If he was to fire a round from here and shoot this, I would interrupt the functioning of a semi-automatic pistol, making this just a blunt object until he recycled another round. So from here, I could be here and we could be in a struggle. There's too much play here. If he was just to simply pivot on me, he could put me back in that line of fire where I do not want to be. So once I get a hold of this weapon, I'm going to bring myself to the weapon. I could pull it here, but then I'm taking that line of fire and I'm moving it towards my kids, my coworkers who are stacked up here with me. So I'm going to bring myself to the weapon. That way there is no muscle game involved. He's here, I come up, grab, almost simultaneously, bringing myself to the weapon here. Now, it is my entire body versus this right here. Once I get to this point, I'm going to drive this muzzle down towards the ground, not down this way, but out this way, pulling him and driving this to the ground.
So Shane, I know that our goal is to drive this muzzle to the ground, but it seems like a lot of different things can come into play and happen as I try to drive it to the ground. Like, what if I just can't drive it to the ground? What if I end up with the weapon out of his hands? What do I do in these different situations? What could happen?
Well, when I go hands-on with that firearm to control that weapon, if I ended up getting that weapon, now is not the time to use this if you don't know how. So at that point, I would utilize that weapon against the individual as a blunt object, preferably with the business end, especially when utilizing the pistol. I'm going to go cavewoman or caveman on the shooter, utilizing this as an improvised weapon, preferably the business end. Here, and I start my attack. And I am going to keep fighting until that shooter can no longer function, until that he is no longer a threat to me and those in my surrounding areas. And Hollywood has misled us on this. We think through the movies that I hit him once or twice, and that's it. The human body is amazing. I do not stop until he is no longer a threat. Now, you may not get the weapon, and you may not end up on the ground. You might end up in a stagnant position. At that time, we're going to utilize what we call a control tactic. Once I get a hold of this weapon here, and I go to drive, it doesn't come out of his hands, I don't drive him to the ground. Bad place to be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize my entire body versus his hand strength to turn this weapon towards him in hopes of prying it out of his hands. So I take the shoulder that's lined up with the muzzle, that same foot, and I'm going to pivot 180 degrees, keeping this to my body. I don't want to sit here and try to turn it. This is a muscle game. I don't want to play the muscle game. Use my whole body here to turn this here. We call this opening the can. Let's show it here. From the backside, you'll see me come around. I'm going to pivot, keeping it close to my body, around here. And if I get that weapon, once again, I release my attack. Here, whatever it takes, whatever I can throw at him, I'm going to throw at him. What I'm doing here with this control tactic, we call it opening the can. As I start to turn the weapon, I'm basically going just against his finger strength here as I turn it. If I turn the other way, because of the side of the door that I may be on, I'm basically going against that thumb strength as I turn it this way. And that's why it is so important that I utilize my entire body plus the momentum that I generate from my pivot, from my movement here, to bring that around and then start my attack. Remember, we don't teach disarms due to the fact that it takes 4,000 repetitions to get into muscle memory. So we're showing control tactics, controlling that firearm. And we have control tactics that we can utilize if we do end up in a stagnant position, because that's a bad place to end up in also.
So Shane, what if as I'm going hands-on with this shooter and I get a hold of that weapon, what if in the process I end up getting shot somehow?
Well, that's obviously a possibility. I mean, this individual is actively engaged in killing people around us. If I was to get shot, I have to remember, my fight's not over. I'm going to keep fighting until I can no longer fight anymore. So if you're moving down a hallway or you're in that fight itself with that weapon and you were to get shot, your fight isn't over until you can no longer function. And we have to remember that. We have to think about that ahead of time. More people die from stab wounds than they do from gunshots. The human body is amazing. You're going to push through the best that you can until you can no longer push anymore.
So now, Shane, tell me why we wouldn't want to just use improvised weapons like the federal government is constantly pushing. You know, look for things in your environment, use it as an improvised weapon. Why would that not be a good idea?
Well, Nick, you don't take a pair of scissors to a gunfight. Simply put, you don't take pepper spray to a gunfight, you don't take a paper cutter to a gunfight, you take a gun to a gunfight. So when you're looking for things in your surrounding areas to utilize as a weapon against a shooter, I think that's a great idea, but not for the individual who's got point at that door. They need to apply these concepts. Get out of line of fire, gain control of the weapon, and then release their attack. So let's talk about improvised weapons. Let's talk about a pair of scissors. We commonly see these all over the place. Let's say I get these scissors, and I'm going to hold them like this. I'm going to choose to hold them kind of like this and strike this individual here as he comes through the door. So I set up tactically, just like we did before, and I have my improvised weapons, and that shooter comes through the door. I come up, and I get him a couple times in the throat. Is that going to stop him from turning this weapon on me and the individuals that are in the room with me? I don't believe so. I believe he's going to still be able to turn that weapon on me and still turn it on the individuals with me and possibly move on to other rooms. Therefore, I don't believe in the point woman or the point man at the door utilizing an improvised weapon. I believe in tactically setting up, get out of the line of fire, gain control of the weapon. If you have another capable fighter in the room with you, they're set up behind you with those scissors. And as you secure that weapon, they come up over the top and they utilize the improvised weapon. Improvised weapons are great, but not for the individual who's on point at that door.
So as you can see, we've talked about controlling the weapon. We talked about the time and place to apply improvised weapons, and you'll see a little bit more of that in the next video. So stay tuned for episode 5C.